Okay.
All right, wonderful. Well, welcome everybody to a new week. This week, so the last several weeks, we've kind of had a common thread among all of our teachings. So we had our karma lesson about seeds and fruits, and then last week we talked about some seeds that we could intentionally plant to sort of create a world that supports oneness and unity for not only ourselves but for everyone. And this week I thought we'd kind of review a concept called samskara. And these are, it's often translated as latent patterns, but that sounds really abstract. It's not very descriptive. Basically, what these are impressions or sort of engravings, shall we say, on the mind. And the more often we repeat certain practices, the more engraved, or certain experiences, the more engraved those samskaras become on our mind and in our experience. And what ends up happening is we end up relying on our memories and our previous experiences of things that sort of colors our experience in the moment. For example, if we've had, I don't know, this is probably a terrible example, but if we constantly were hurt or emotionally wounded by somebody with a particular color hair or something, we might meet another person with that color hair and be kind of like inherently distrustful. So that's maybe a bad example, but you kind of get the idea. Another example that is often given is, when you're a little child and you touch a toaster and it's hot, suddenly everything that's metallic and shiny is something to be a little bit afraid of because you have this memory of this experience. And so the idea, again, like karma, it's neither good or bad. It just is a seed and a fruit. And depending on how we look at it, we could say that it's good or bad, but really it's not part of its inherent value. And in the same way, our samskaras are neither good or bad habits. They're just habits or impressions. But like karma, we have the opportunity to be mindful about what patterns we continue to further increase or increase their power, and which ones we sort of learn to adjust to. And so just like the good and bad karma, we can ask ourselves, does this pattern or does this habitual practice lead me toward oneness, or does it kind of pull me out of oneness? One of my really bad samskaras is scrolling through social media. We might all have that one, I don't know. But it doesn't necessarily bring me to a place of oneness. Sometimes it does. Sometimes when I'm feeling kind of at home by myself or whatever, seeing my friends' faces can contribute to my feeling of connectedness, but most of the time it doesn't. So what we want to do is see if we can, with intention and awareness, just like we did with our seeds, bring intention and awareness to what things we can, what patterns we want to keep and continue to strengthen, and what patterns we might want to bring some awareness to so that we can disrupt them a little bit. And as is the habit in most of my classes, we begin in a seated position, and we'll do that again today. But what we're going to do is take this pattern that we almost always do, this sort of predictable, expected result, and shake it up a little bit. So in our comfortable seat, we're just going to try to find some novel movement, meaning it doesn't necessarily fit a pattern. It's not necessarily something we've done before, but just try to move your body and just kind of be wild with it. Try to see if you can come up with like a unique set of movements. And so again, it's a little strange and nobody's looking. Close your eyes so you're not looking at anybody else. And just allow your body to move. Let your shoulders move, your hips move, your hands, your wrists, your neck. Maybe we stretch out the legs a little bit and kind of get the feet and legs involved so we can kind of just try an experimental set of movements here. And so this is something that does not conform to a pattern. It's new, it's novel, and because of that, because we're trying intentionally not to do something we've done before, we have to bring all of our awareness into what we're doing. All right, so now that we've kind of shaken up the energy in the body, let's come back into our more familiar stillness, finding that establishment. And there's a couple things that we want to do with this practice. We're going to move through some movements that are familiar to us, but try to bring a sense of deeper awareness to make them novel so that we're bringing our full awareness and our full presence to those poses or postures or movements. And then we're also going to do, again, some weird stuff that may or may not flow very well. It may or may not make sense in your body, but we're just going to experiment with that and see See if we can allow that practice of bringing our full awareness in. So a regular cat-cow that we normally do as we inhale, let's bring the chest forward, shoulders back, chin lifts. As we exhale, chin to chest, back of the heart is open. We know this flow really well. So just kind of move a few times forward and back in the heart, opening the front and back body alternatively. We can pair this with our breath because we are so used to doing that we almost don't even have to think about what it is that we're doing. And as you flow back and forth here, we're gonna take, the next time chin is to chest and back body is open, take a pause and let a few breaths flow. So we're already disrupting this pattern of movement a little bit. Now let's try the reverse. And I still, after years of doing this backwards, find this difficult. So breathe into your back body. And then as you exhale, open forward. Inhale, cat. Exhale, cow. And take a few more rounds of this, kind of reversing our habitual pattern. And then again, find your way back to that neutral spot and just sort of recognize or take a moment to reflect on whether that was easy or hard to reverse our patterning. It doesn't have to be a difficult motion. The motion was the same skill level, but the patterning was a little bit more challenging maybe because it's the reverse. And a good example of this is trying to brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand, or getting into your car from the passenger seat instead of the driver's seat, or it's just something that you can still do, doesn't require a ton of skill, but just that's different than the way we normally do things. So for our next section of things here, we're just gonna switch the legs. So whichever way your legs normally or naturally landed, switch those up a little bit. And we're gonna find just another common motion in yoga practice. So hands can come down to the floor beside, and as we inhale, we're gonna sweep out wide and up and open. And as we exhale, come back down. Just sort of get into the pattern of this. Probably pretty easy because we do this motion a lot in yoga practice. Probably doesn't require much thinking. We might even be able to, do something else while we were doing this. Doesn't require an awful lot of our attention. And the next time you inhale and your palms are reaching upward, just pause here, take a few breaths, just disrupt the cycle a little bit. And this, I feel like, is so hard, but it's not difficult for the body. So what we're gonna do is as we inhale, bring the hands down, and as we exhale, bring them back up. Same motion, but a slightly different approach and different pattern. And I find that if I'm not really mindful, I slip right back into the way I always do it. So this is a challenge. Exhale as your hands rise. Inhale as your hands come down. Maybe one more, two more rounds. Then come back to your stillness again and just take a moment to reflect on how hard or easy it was to kind of shake it up and do things differently. And then from here, we're gonna move into our tabletop shape. So hands and knees, legs coming behind the body. Again, this is a pose that's pretty familiar to us. And we're gonna try to just do a couple things that are pretty regular for us. As we inhale, we're gonna lift the right leg, and it can be high or low. Maybe we wanna lift it really high, maybe toes are just above the floor, but just kind of pause on 3 limbs here. Bring the right leg back down. Let's lift the left arm. So 3 limbs again here, we're just kind of reaching out. Maybe we wanna find a little motion here with that left arm, maybe we're still. Come back to all fours, let's lift the left leg. And again, movement or stillness, it can be as high or low as you want. Coming back to all fours, let's lift the right arm. And again, movement or stillness, just kind of feel out what it is to be on 3 limbs. Excellent. Back to all fours. We're gonna rise up to a standing on the knees shape here. So just kind of like we would be standing normally, but this time on the knees instead of the feet. And this part is kind of weird. Again, this may or may not be a good flow. It might be smooth, it might be awkward. But what we're gonna try to do is lean down to place a hand either on the floor, maybe a block or some support could be useful here. And just kind of let the left arm kind of come up and over. So we got a little side bend shape. Then bring your left hand down next to your right, so both hands are still on the right side of your mat. Kind of open up the left shoulder away from the left hip and squeeze the right hip and shoulder together. Then walk back to center so we're on all fours aligned. Lift the back of your heart up and open. And exhale and bring your hand or your hips back towards your heels. Sink into child's pose for just a moment. Rising back up to all fours, we're gonna walk both hands over to the left side of the mat, that open side bend, pulling the right shoulder away from the right hip, squeezing left hip and left shoulder together. Then anchoring through that left hand, let's lift the right hand off the mat and kind of come into that little side bending shape. And then hinging back up to standing on the knees. We'll take a back bending motion here, so perhaps arms lift and so does the heart and chin. Perhaps hands are at the hips or pressing into the sacrum. Perhaps we're reaching back for the heels. We've got a little camel variation going on here. So we've moved the spine in all directions from what's pretty familiar shape for us. Coming back into neutral and back down to all fours. Let's just take a couple of cat-cows, maybe some barrel rolls so we get in some of that side motion. And even though we haven't done that exact flow, at least in this class before, we were able to follow it because we're coming from a starting point that was fresh for us. So coming back to neutral, let's slide the knees out to one side, bring the bottom back to the floor, feet coming in front of us, arms coming behind. Fingers can point away or opposite direction of your toes. And we're gonna take some movements in like a reverse table. So we don't have to come all the way flat unless you just want to, but we're gonna lift up and then lower back down. So we're just kind of lifting and lowering the sacrum from the floor, making sure that we're steady in all these shapes. And then when we kind of got the hang of this, we're gonna take a pause while we're lifted. So again, you don't have to be totally high. As long as your hips are off the floor, you can come level to the floor if you like. And we're gonna try that same thing where we find 3 limbs. So just lift one limb, doesn't matter which one, off the floor. Just for a moment. Come back down. Lift a different limb. Come back down. Choose a 3rd limb away from the floor. Back to all fours and lift that final limb, whichever one it is. Take a couple of breaths. And come back down. Relax your hips back down to the floor. Take a moment. Maybe come off the wrists for a moment. Find some novel motion to kind of stretch out, shaking up and breaking up any energy in the body. Some of that weird, goofy, novel movement. Aren't you glad we're not in the studio right now? All right, let's come back toward our reverse table. So kind of preparing for that shape. And again, whether your hips and sacrum come a good ways off the floor or just a little bit, once you're off the floor, try to kind of find a cat-cow in this shape. Notice how much more effort we have to apply to where our hips and shoulders and head and neck are, because this is not the way we normally do it. So after we take a few rounds of this, let's come back down to the floor again, kind of shake out the wrists, let go of any tension in the body, kind of shake out and break up these flows of energy in the body. And then we'll swing back around to our more normal tabletop. So legs are coming back around behind the body, back onto hands and knees. Let's take one more round of those novel movements. So just take a few cat-cows here. Again, look how easy this is compared to how we just did it. And let's just find the reverse of our first movement. So walk both hands over to the left. And open up that right side body. Squeeze the left side body. Getting firm on that left hand, lift the right arm up, kind of find a more open side bend here. Rise up to standing on the knees, find some kind of camel, whether that's supported or reaching for the hips or the arms might be raised here. Come back to a neutral spine, bring your right hand to the floor beside you. Left arm is lifted or raised, it can move. Find that left side body opening. Left hand comes down to meet the right along the right side of the mat, squeezing the right hip and shoulder, opening the left hip and shoulder from one another. Then walk back to all fours in that neutral space. Take a nice big inhale into your cat back. Exhale into child's pose. So we've already discovered the power of doing that which is familiar, these patterns of our lives that are pretty regular. A lot of those things we can do on what we might say is autopilot, meaning that we're not thinking too much about it. We're not bringing our full awareness to it because it's not required. And as we take this little break here in child's pose, we have an opportunity to look within and to discover where could I bring a little bit more awareness to my patterns so that I can therefore decide whether or not they're useful toward my goal or not useful toward my goal. Let's move back into our tabletop shape, so rising back up. Let's stretch out one leg behind the body, kind of pressing into the hands to open up that calf muscle. So toes are on the floor. We're just kind of pressing to open that back of the leg, especially through the calf. Switch legs, find the other one reaching back. Press into the hands to open there. Coming back to tabletop, let's tuck both sets of toes underneath the body and start to slowly press up into downward facing dog. So here's another pose that we know well, that's familiar, maybe doesn't require an awful lot of concentration to hold this shape. We know it. And we also know a typical vinyasa flow where we move from downward facing dog into a plank shape, lowering to the belly, finding a lifting of the heart, a back bend shape, and back to downward facing dog. So we're going to move through that familiar vinyasa. Just kind of take it at your own pace. Maybe it's just one breath per movement. Maybe we hold each pose for a moment. So just kind of take it at your own pace. But just flow through a few repeated of these vinyasa movements. And notice that the more we repeat this motion, the easier it is to do, not because our muscles are less tired, but simply because it doesn't require as much mental energy. So maybe finish whichever flow you are on here. We'll all land back in our downward facing dog shape. And once we've all met up here, let's begin to lift the right leg up and off of the mat. So we have either a high or a low lift of that right leg. Feel free to find, again, movement or stillness here. Maybe we try to find some novel way of moving. And we're going to try something tricky here. With that right leg lifted, we're going to start to bend at the left knee and see if we can just come down to the left knee on the floor. Excellent. And with that right leg lifted, pull the right arm up and away from the floor as well. So we have sort of a little half moon shape. Take a breath or so here. And let the right foot come down to the mat behind you and then reach the right arm sort of away from the foot. So opening that side body. Bring the right arm back up, bring the right knee back to the floor, reach underneath the body and twist your heart open to the left. Press into the mat with that left hand so heart is shifting. Untwisting, come back to all fours in tabletop. Lift the right leg again, then tuck the left toes under the body and challenge yourself to rise back up into that three-limb shape. On an exhale, step that right foot forward, find a lunge. So back knee here, left knee can remain off the mat or it can come down, your choice, and you can change your mind throughout this next part of the flow. So on an inhale, we're gonna lift and open the heart, so that could be pressing into the floor, pressing into the thigh, arms lifted, or maybe interlaced behind the back. But chest is lifted, gaze is lifted, sink down low through your hips. And once you have whatever shape you are in here, find some way to move. So maybe your arms are moving, maybe you're twisting the body, maybe the knee in the front is bending and straightening. Just find some novel movement. First of all, notice how hard it is to decide what to move. We kind of know how to hold this shape. We don't necessarily know how to move it. With your next exhale, bring your hands back to framing the right toes and let your head come in towards your chest. Kind of lift the back of the heart. And again, just find a little bit of shift in the hips. Maybe the head turns side to side or the neck stretches in some way. But stay lifted through the back of the heart as you find this movement. Then start to shift your right hand inside of the right foot. Maybe right foot comes out a little wider. And with this little dragon shape, we have lots of variations that we can take. We can lower down to the mat. We can use supports here. But what I'd like for us to do is once we decide how we want to hold this shape, again, just find a little bit of movement. Maybe it's the hips moving. Maybe it's the head and neck. Maybe we lift one arm and then the other. And then we'll start to bring the hands back toward the left knee. So if it's lifted, you can drop it down if you like. And just hover, kind of coming up tall, the back of the right leg active, the torso active and lifted. Find a steadiness. See how still you can become and feel where there's sensation in the back of the right leg, maybe sensation in the torso. As you walk your hands back forward, frame your right toes. Tuck the left ones under the body. See if you can move straight from here, nice and slow and mindfully into that three-limb shape one more time. Movement or stillness as you lift. Then bring your right foot back to the mat. Take about 3 breaths, kind of pushing into the hands, pushing into the feet. And on that third exhale, let your knees come down to the mat again. Big cat arches. You inhale, exhale, child's pose. Take a few moments just to consider what new and novel movements came into that flow and how that novelty made you pay more attention. You know, this happened to a lot of us when this global pandemic first struck our lives. We had our routines and our way of doing things, and the global pandemic came in and changed absolutely everything. From how we work to how we interact with people. Now we have this new habit where we remember to wash our hands, we remember to grab a mask before we walk out the door, etc. So everything is changeable. These samskaras, however deeply ingrained they might be, are adaptable. And if we bring enough awareness, and that's why we're sitting in this child's pose, if we bring enough awareness and a constant mindful vigilance, we have the power to rise above these patterns that are ingrained. So from child's pose, come back up to table. Tuck both sets of toes. Let's come back into downward facing dog. Make sure you're nice and steady. Again, not too much mindfulness here because this is a pose that we know well, but now we're gonna start to shake it up a little bit. So left leg is gonna rise. This time we've got our 3-limbed downward facing dog. Movement or stillness is okay here. High or low lifting is okay here. Just find some experimentation, bring some novelty, bring some awareness to it. Notice how not having all 4 limbs on the floor automatically brings a little more mindfulness. And again, we're going to try to challenge ourselves to leave the left leg lifted as we bend into the right knee and come down. So both hands on the mat, just the right knee. Then open that left arm up and open into the sky. See if we can take just a few breaths in this little shortened half moon. We might call this moon on the horizon, half moon on the horizon. And again, we'll bring the left hand back down to the mat. And just kind of leave that left leg lifted for a moment, kind of find some movement here. Bring it back down to the floor, and let's scoot that left arm underneath the body into the right, finding that little twist. So some of these poses are familiar, but we're approaching them from different angles. Just notice how that brings a little bit more mindfulness. It would be a fun experiment to teach a class where no poses were named, only instructions on how to arrive there. That might bring a little more mindfulness as well. Come back up into all fours in table. Let's lift that left leg off the floor again, high or low. Tuck the right toes. And let's see if we can come back up into our downward facing dog in 3 limbs. Left leg will eventually step between the hands again, so we have our lunge. Back knee can be lifted or lowered, your choice. And find a way to come into your sort of anjali here. So the heart is open and lifted, chin is open and lifted, hands can be pressing into the floor or the thigh or reaching up or behind the back. Maybe try one you've never tried before and just see. If it's not for you, change it. But once we're in this shape, once we found a steadiness, notice how much variation we can take as far as twisting the body or moving the body or changing hand positions. Just kind of feel some novelty. Notice how hard it is to decide what to move because we don't know. It's new. We have to bring mindfulness to it to make a choice. And choice is sort of the ultimate freedom. So take a couple more breaths of play here, kind of figure out some new things. Then we'll bring our hands back down to framing the left toes, chin tucking in towards the chest. Back of the heart is lifted. Again, find a little bit of change or movement. Maybe one hand rises and then the other. And we'll start to bring the left hand again inside that left foot. Left foot might walk out a little wider. Finding the dragon pose of your choice. So maybe if you normally do it with your back knee lowered, maybe try it lifted, see if that's for you. Maybe again, one hand kind of rises and moves and the other might rise and move. Maybe the hips are circulating here. I know this is all very awkward and it's not very clear instruction. And that's partly because I don't want you to do just what I'm telling you to do. I want you to bring mindfulness and presence to what is possible in each of these poses so that you are making decisions in the moment and not relying on your memory or your previous experience. So find an experimentation for another breath or so. And then again, we'll walk our hands back towards the right knee, whether it's lifted or lowered. Find an active left leg and an active lengthened torso here. Find a little bit of steadiness and stillness. Observe where there is sensation. So if you can notice sensation in a completely new place, maybe somewhere that's passive, like the face or that right foot, just notice. And as you walk your hands forward again to come back into our little lunge, frame the left toes, tuck the right ones, and let's see if we can move from this lunge position back into our 3-limbed shape, moving slowly and mindfully. Take a couple of breaths if you want to or can. And then we'll come back down to all 4 limbs in downward facing dog. Take about 3 breaths here. And on that 3rd exhale, we'll again drop the knees down to the mat. On our inhale, we'll take a nice big cat back. And on our exhale, we'll sink back into child's pose. Take some time here just to reflect. Again, what patterns do we know so well, like downward facing dog or like some of these other familiar poses? What patterns, like brushing our teeth or making our coffee, do we just kind of do on autopilot because no attention is really required to complete the task? And could we, or are we capable of bringing deeper awareness to these patterns so that we can decide, is this a groove that I'm in? Or is this a rut that I'm in? Is this pattern contributing to my happiness? Is this pattern contributing to mindlessness or non-growth? Just take a few more breaths here, resting in child's pose in the body, resting the body, but continuing to remain active in the mind. And again, we'll come back up into our tabletop shape, tucking both sets of toes. Let's move back into that familiar downward facing dog. And once we're kind of stable in our down dog, let's see if we can just gently, maybe moving just the hips or just the shoulders or just the head and neck, find a little cat-cow here. It doesn't have to be extreme. Doesn't even have to be perceptible from the outside, but just find a little variation. And then allow both feet to step forward. Let's find a passive forward fold at the top of the mat. Relaxing the head and neck. Staying stable and strong through the feet and legs. Let the chin hang towards the chest. Top of the head heavy and reaching for the floor. Feel the legs and feet and sacrum sort of as the body. It is always mindful. It is always in the moment because that's how the body functions. But let the head and the heart just be soft and passive here. Maybe even shaking it out. Just kind of let it be really loose. On an inhale, let's rise to a flat back, engaging the heart. Notice if it's higher or lower than your shoulders. Maybe even find a little cat-cow movement. Notice the crown of the head, which direction it's pointing, and then be really mindful about aligning everything. Active through the torso, active through the legs and feet. Arms could come to the sides, they could reach forward, they could support you on your thighs, they could reach back. But maintain that mindfulness in the head and the heart as well as the body through the legs. On an exhale, relax back down. Find passive arms, passive head, passive heart, active legs. Keep a little softness in the knees, maybe you find a little bounce in the legs. When you fully let go and become passive there, come back into that alertness in the torso. Half fold. Again, arms can be anywhere, they can even be moving if you like. But just maintain that alertness in the torso as well as in the body. So the head, the heart, and the body all active. One more contrast here. Exhale and let go. I know that backs of the legs are starting to be really alert now. Maybe bend a little softness into the knees if that is helpful to soften some of that growth. Then lift back up into your half fold. Arms can be anywhere. And with your next inhale, keep your flat back as you hinge all the way up to standing. Exhale, release your arms. Take about 3 breaths in this very common Tadasana pose in yoga. We do this a lot. We know how to stand. We also do this off the mat, so we know this pose. And then see if you can just, again, this is super strange, nobody's looking, but just kind of find some movement. Feel free to turn to the side and use more of your mat, but just kind of open up your body. See if you can move each joint, check into the fingers, the neck, the ankles and the toes. Feet might lift off the mat. Just try to find some movement that nobody's ever done before. It looks silly, I know, it's crazy, but just break it up. Just kind of break up our normal way of doing things. Shake everything out. And then come back to the top of your mat. So we're gonna try to find, again, something familiar, just a basic sun salutation. We're going to try to bring a little bit more mindfulness to that. So hands can come to heart center. On an inhale, whether your arms move or not, reach your head and your heart upward. Find a little back bend shape. Arms can be anywhere. Maybe bring them into a new place where you don't normally bring them. Take a couple of breaths to experience that novelty. Notice how much find your fold. Knees can be bent, arms might be interlaced behind the back. Find a new position somehow for your hands or your feet. Bending at the knees, plant your palms. Step the left foot towards the back of the mat. Let's drop the left heel in towards the center of the mat and then just rise up. This is a little different than we would normally do. We're facing that left side of the mat, arms out at shoulder height, gaze over the right hand, exhale, warrior two. And we normally do like a warrior one here. We're just kind of breaking it up a little bit. Take your pause, feel the posture, feel some movement if you like. Find a new way of approaching this. Push with your right foot to send your body back, and then push with your left foot to send your body forward. Kind of feel that balance. Good. On your next exhale, bring your hands down to frame your right toes. Kind of pivot onto the toes of the left foot. Step back into downward facing dog. Maybe we find a little micro cat-cow in our spine in this shape to bring a little novelty to keep some awareness. Exhale, find some kind of plank position, knees on or off. Feel it out, maybe find some movement, maybe we shift and drop heels to one side and then the other. Then come all the way onto the belly. So normally we just kind of push up into a cobra, which we can do here. Maybe we lift the hands off the mat before we lift. Maybe we interlace fingers behind the back before we lift. Maybe once we're lifted, we drop one shoulder and then the other. Find a way to bring some novelty to this familiar shape. And then relax back down to the belly. Tucking your toes, press up maybe into tabletop first, and then all the way into downward facing dog. Left foot's gonna step forward towards the top of your mat. And this time let's find warrior one. So back foot stays back, lift up. Maybe find some movement here. If the arms are in a new position or they're in motion. Come back to framing your toes, step both feet forward. Take a few moments to shake out any tension in the hanging body. And then find a way, any way you like, to rise back up to Tadasana. Maybe that's rolling, maybe that's hinging. And once you arrive, standing, again, just kind of shake out all the energy in the body. Lift one foot and then the others, kind of break it up. And then let's find the other side. So maybe we can make different choices in these poses and do something daring and not have symmetry. So again, as you inhale, hands might be at heart center, they might stay there, they might lift. They might come behind your body, but find that open heart, the back bend here in Tadasana. Hold it for just enough to feel it, and then exhale, find your fold again. Bending at the knees enough to plant your palms, let your right foot step towards the back of the mat. And then drop your right heel towards the center of the mat. Lift yourself up. Body is facing that right side. Arms at shoulder height. Gaze over the left hand. Sink down into warrior two. Maybe push into the left foot to push you to the back of the mat. Push into the right foot to send you forward. Kind of play with the motion here. Maybe the hips move. Maybe the arms move. Another breath or so just to kind of feel and be fully present in the shape or movement that you're taking. And again, we will frame the toes, so coming down, pivoting on that back foot a little ways. And maybe we drop back down into our lunge here. Just find some movement of some variety. A little asymmetrical from our other side, but again, just kind of keeping you on your toes, because if you know what's coming, you can do it from memory. If it's fresh, you have to stay mindful. What do I do now? What do I do now? And that's the attitude we want to take, is what do I do now? What do I do now? Because that means you're present. Good. Take any pose or series of movements to come from this lunge shape into a forward fold at the top of your mat. So maybe we step back first into down dog. Maybe we step both feet forward immediately. Maybe we flow through a vinyasa. Take your time, find some novelty. And eventually everybody will find themselves in that forward fold at the top of the mat. So daring to have asymmetry and imbalance in the body. At your own speed and at your own pace, choosing your own adventure, being fully present and making a conscious choice. Find your way back to standing in whatever way that is for you. Once you arrive, kind of shake out the body again, maybe lifting the ankles and feet. Break up all that energy. Now let's flow back down to a seated shape. So sitting bones back on the mat, feet in front of the body, knees bent, hands behind. We're kind of preparing again for that reverse table. So let's first just kind of pressing into the mat with the feet and the hands. Just take a little bit of lifting and lowering of your sacrum away from the floor. And again, you can come fully upright, maybe even a little back bend, or you can just lift an inch or so off the floor. Either way, we're kind of getting that novelty and that motion of reverse table. Next time your hips come back down to the floor, stay in this position and just let your knees fall side to side. And again, sort of rather than guiding you, I'm kind of shirking my duties today, but rather than guiding you, I would like for you to, when I give a signal, whichever side you are leaning to, find a deer pose in that shape. So keep moving your knees side to side. And whichever side you're on now, find your deer pose. You can stay upright, you can lower down, you can find support, you can find movement. You can turn the head side to side. And once you're kind of generally in your deer shape, find some way to make it new and novel. Notice what happens if you bring a little more cat or a little more cow in, whether you press into the left hand or the right hand, just kind of notice. Take one more full breath in, and as you exhale, twist yourself back to facing front. Soles of the feet on the floor, hands behind you. Take a few of those lifts and lowers. Lifting the sacrum and lowering. Maybe with the breath, maybe not. Maybe holding each shape for a breath or two. Maybe flowing with the breath. And next time your hips are on the floor again, just move into the other direction with deer pose, whatever direction you didn't take last time. And again, once you're in that general shape, choose whether you want to stay high or drop low, whether you want to have movement. Experiment with a little bit of a cat shape in the back, a little bit of a cow shape in the back. Experiment with which direction your gaze is in, maybe even if it's moving. What happens if you press into the right hand versus pressing into the left hand? Take about 3 or 4 more breaths to find movement and expression and novelty and alertness in this pose. Breaking up the pattern of the way we always do things. One more full breath into your lungs, and then exhale to untwist your body facing forward again. Let's say just about 3 more of those lifts and lowers, any height that feels good to you. And let's just relax the spine down to the floor. Soles of the feet can remain. So sacrum, shoulders, back of the head resting. Maybe the feet come a little wider and the knees fall together for a moment. Maybe hands come to rest somewhere on the body, and just try to find as much stillness as you can. If your hands are resting on the body, feel the flow of your breath. also feel the very regular beating of your heart. Now, ideally, the heartbeat and the breath moving and all the digestion that's happening within our bodies, all the processing that's happening in our bodies is happening on autopilot. That is in many ways the function of the body, to do these things without active thought. We don't have to remember to breathe. It continues to happen while we're sleeping, etc. And that's not a bad thing. But we can also choose to interact with some of these autopilot processes. For example, next time you take a nice big breath in, inhale a big deep breath in and hold your breath. Pause your breath. Your heart's still beating. Then relax your breath out through the nose or the mouth. Continue to take slower breaths, long inhales, brief pause as you hold, long exhales, brief pause. What we're doing is bringing mindfulness and intention to a process that is normally automated. It is possible. Now, just briefly before we find our deep relaxation, let's make our breath kind of forceful and shallow. Quick breath in, quick breath out. Short breath in, short breath out. And then release that practice. Let your breath flow back to its natural state. Let it go back to autopilot. And the illustration that we're finding here is that A, we can change and being intention and mindfulness and awareness to processes that are normally automated within us. That each intentional action that we take or each manipulation of these automatic responses creates a consequence of some kind. In one case, maybe our heart was beating slower. In the second case, maybe our heart was beating faster. But this affects every other system in the body. And so just by bringing awareness and control, or awareness and intention, to a few of the automated processes in our life, we can begin to make wide sweeping systemic changes in not only our own lives, but it also bleeds out into the lives of others, as we discovered with our karmic seeds. So just notice in this moment if there's anything else that your body is longing for. Maybe knees to chest, a happy baby, a short flower, a gentle inversion, a shoulder stand of some kind. Just notice what you need. Maybe you need a supine twist or two. And again, I'm not giving you instructions on purpose, so that you will think about and assess for yourself what your body needs in this moment, which might be different than any other time you've ever closed up a practice. If there's nothing that your body needs in this moment, feel free to begin to move into your resting shape. Feel free to use or not use support. Feel free to take a slightly different rest pose than usual. Maybe it's legs up the wall. Maybe today you take your resting pose in Sukhasana to meditate upright and bringing a little more alertness to your rest. But your choice. And if you haven't already, begin to find your way into that stillness, whatever that looks like for you today. Yoga Sutra, I believe this is from book 4, Sutra 18. Tells us that patterns of consciousness are always known by pure awareness, their ultimate, unchanging witness. So like so many other lessons that we've learned together in these classes, the whole idea of yoga can be summed up into connecting to that almost omniscient witness that was within us. And we do this by moving past the movements of the world, moving past the movements of our changing mood and states of being, moving past the movements of the mind, and deeper into that inner witnessing consciousness that is resting in a place of stillness within. See if you can connect to that stillness or that witnessing now. Watching your breath. Being aware of your surroundings, being aware of your interior. Just allow yourself to move into a place of not doing. And see how much action is still happening within the body, within the mind, within the world around you. Feel the parts of you that are still and stable. connect to that part of you that is witnessing, the part of you that is scanning for what is still and stable. And from that witnessing place, observe the movements of breath, the movements of the heart and the circulatory system, maybe even noticing any sensations of digestion. Notice the sounds and sensations around you and in the world around you. Become deeply rooted in that awareness, that mindfulness, that vigilance. And we have our ways that we come from this stillness to end our practice. But again, I'm going to shirk in my duties and not guide you too much. Allow yourself, allow that watchful awareness to choose how to come back to motion. Maybe it's deepening the breath, maybe it's finding movement, maybe it's staying in that stillness and just readying yourself to come up and out of your shape. Take as much time as you need. We are in no hurry. We'll have the same amount of time to rise as we always do. But find it in your own way. Let that awareness guide you. Observe the movements and the changes, what parts of you had previously been still that are now finding engagement or movement, what parts of you that were passive are now engaging and awakening. And once you're in your upright seat, again, if you're still arriving there, take your time, no rush. But once you're in that upright seat, find an establishment. We know this pose, we sit in it a lot. The more we sit in this pose in silence and stillness, probably the better off our lives will be. But in this state of being, we have our habits, we have our patterns, we have our memories. And I'll ask a question that I asked a few weeks ago in class. How much of this current experience is from memory? And how much is being created new in this moment? And this is why I brought you through all those confusing and strange postures and movements today, because I knew you couldn't do it from memory. It had to be created new in that moment. And yes, it was awkward. And yes, maybe we didn't have as beautiful a form as we sometimes do. But we learned something and we were fully present. And maybe fully present, even with mistakes or lack of grace, is more powerful in many ways than nailing something perfectly that we've just done a million times. And so take that into your heart, maybe bringing the palms together, kind of scoop up that possibility of newness and bring it into your heart. Allow your chin to drop into your chest and recognize that vigilance and the role of looking inward, the role of mindfully watching our thoughts, our words, our actions, knowing the seeds that we plant, knowing which patterns to deepen and which patterns to adjust or change or reframe. As we move into this deeper awareness, as we become more intentional with our own lives, that attention and peace begins to flow outward to serve all. And so we close our practice with this prayer. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings be happy, healthy, safe, and free. Namaste.